Hey everyone. So back when I was in high school, let's say 20 some years ago, my father one day asked me if I had done my homework. And I assured him I hadn't. But he asked me, well, what did you learn? And I looked at my shoes or something, or mumbled basically, don't worry about it, I got it. And he said, you don't understand something until you can explain it to someone else. And I wrote that off at the time as just stuff Dad says, right? Until about, I don't know, 10 or some years later, and I realized, A, he's right. B, that's what I do for a living. And C, that's the best way to really internalize something is if you externalize it. So we're going to do a little thing today that we have never done before, not just at Bloom, obviously this is the first. I don't think we've ever done it at a GreenBiz audience, which is at a plenary level to interact with you, to sort of figure out what did you learn, what happened for you in these last couple of days. And so there's going to be a few things that we did. But the first thing is that we're going to, if you know what a word cloud is, well, no, actually, yeah, we're going to have a word cloud where you're going to open the app and go to this session and poll. So start to do that if you don't mind. As much as I don't want people looking at the phone when I'm on stage, this is your invitation to do exactly that. If you go to the session and click on it, and then it says polls, what's a word that, or it could be two, that best summarizes your experience at Bloom? I'm not going to, just any word, whether it's about your feeling, whether it's about the content, whether it's about something, anything at all. Just, if you can type that in, and it will start to populate on the screen, and when there starts to be a little bit of population on that, I think Christine will put that slide up. Not yet, Christine, that's next. I think there's a word cloud that's going to come up, but we just want to get, sort of understand some of what you heard. I've got it on my phone because I get to see that, but I'm seeing inspired, energizing, hope, expansive, connection. These are the big words that showed up. Learning, energizing keeps showing up, so that's great. So keep that going, and if we can figure out how to put that, oh, there it is, right on the screen. I'm not seeing it here, so it's right up there. You can see it better than I. So this is great. They tend to be mostly positive words. I'm trying to see if I can see anything here that's less than positive. So I'm hoping that you're, if you have some other words that aren't necessarily positive, that's fair. So that's part one. So thank you for doing that. Part two is want you to turn to somebody in the audience, someone that whether you know or don't know, and just offer, what was an aha moment for you in this? What's a takeaway that you have that you're going to be bringing back to the office, as they say? Just take 2-3 minutes to share with somebody what you heard, or what was a big aha and a big takeaway for you. Can you do that? We'll take 2-3 minutes. Go for it.
All right. Here we are, back with you at the Bloom Sidebar. The audience is currently going through their aha moment as to what they've taken away in this last 2 days at Bloom.
Yeah, it's the first of its kind where we've done something interactive during the keynote, and it's perfectly in Joel fashion to engage the audience in such a way. So we hear some applause in the background. Woo! What's your aha moment, Grant?
I think I'm still aha-ing. I think it's a process. I don't think I've come to my moment. I think what I got exposed to in a new way in my world of focusing on institutional investors and their interests as it pertains to sustainability, and more recently, biodiversity. A couple big firms like Schroders is a good example, saying that biodiversity is their primary focus going forward, not just in the sustainability umbrella, but as an investment theme, period. Yeah. Getting to see some of those folks in person and dig behind the headlines as to how they're actually beginning that work. And it's still nascent, just like Jake was talking about with the startup space, the early stage capital world, it's also still nascent. But getting to understand that how these frameworks and pathways that we talk a lot about here, all the various acronyms, TNFD and SPTN and others who joined us on the sidebar yesterday.
Alphabet soup.
The alphabet souping is enabling that, and it's starting. So
Yeah.
my ahaing is matching the momentum that they're making.
Right. And I think working in the field as like curators of content and people that have to, keep our finger on the pulse, it's hard to have aha moments because we read about this day in and day out. But I think one aha moment that sort of stood out to me from the conference was learning that 80% of the world's biodiversity is stewarded by indigenous communities. Like I had a sense of that, but I think when you think about 80% of land and biodiversity in the hands of these communities is pretty stellar. But on the contrary to that, like out of the $2.7 billion that was invested in rainforest preservation in the last decade, only 1% of that was given to indigenous communities. So you have communities that are doing all this work to preserve their land and their culture and biodiversity that affects all of us, grasshopper effect.
Yes.
And then you have the funding that is basically billions of dollars of funding, and they're getting none of it. So huge disparity there. And talking to a lot of the indigenous communities that were present at Bloom and Verge, that was just reiterated so much, that disparity. And it makes me think, okay, as a curator of content, how can we uplift these voices more often and think about these things further?
I think that adding on to that statistic, I think there was Juan Carlos who shared this yesterday on the sidebar that it's 80% of the natural ecosystems are stewarded by 4% of the world's population, I think. So quite a big responsibility.
Quite.
I think I'm trying to think of what else is ahaing at the moment. I think part of the aha actually is just the people I've met here. This is a brand new community. This is Bloom's first year.
Yeah.
As with any first convening launch, you don't quite know who's going to show up. You know who you want to show up, but you just kind of find out on the day of. And I have my own personal affinity for greenfin, obviously. It's my near and dearest event. But this community of 500 and change people, every single one I've encountered is deeply passionate, deeply opinionated in an informed and kind of refreshing way, and have a lot of energy behind the agenda that they're laying out. And I can't say that's the case for every conference I attend, to be honest.
That's a
very
really good
intentional
point.
group.
I would say so. I mean, when you're fighting for like animals, life on Earth, plants, everything, it's like you should be passionate, and I really respect that. I feel that is mirrored too with the Emerging Leaders group. For those of you watching who don't know, the Emerging Leaders program is a BIPOC scholarship program to help fund young professionals and students of color to come attend Bloom and Verge. And I've been talking to them. We ran into them at dinner yesterday. So passionate, so accomplished at such a young age, which is really cool and very commendable.
I was lying. So I still am ahaing, but I actually have another aha moment. I'm going to pile on. The talk before I got to speak with Helen and Hiba from the Supreme Court Justice from New Zealand.
Yes.
I got a sneak peek to watch that before we came here, but I'd consequently forgotten about it and got reminded watching it in real time today. And I think that feels like a sea change in some way for the Supreme Court body of a developed country to give official rights in that kind of setting to natural ecosystems.
Yes.
I can't speak for the U.S. Supreme Court doing something similar, but it feels monumental.
Yeah, I think so too. And if you think about these entities in the way that a lot of the indigenous communities have expressed, is that they have spirit within them, which makes them worthy of rights, which I think is actually another aha moment to reframe the way that we view biodiversity in nature.
Yeah.
So it's been really rewarding being here, and I think that with this huge emphasis on this subject matter, I'm thinking and brainstorming about ways that we can incorporate this into every session that we do across our conferences, and have some element of biodiversity in nature, which I feel like we do a good job of incorporating, but bringing that to the next level.
Yeah. I also, still on a positive note, but this is there's a lot of comparisons made of we've done the climate thing for 20 plus years as an industry that's tried to aggregate the information, do something with that information to take different actions as to how we produce and consume things and how monetary value is ascribed. and there's been plenty of hiccups along the way. Just most of the data we've been shown on the various slides of Verge and Bloom keynotes, the carbon emission chart is still going up and to the right, and a lot of charts that we don't want to see going up and to the right still are. That's not to say we haven't made a ton of progress, but there's so much more in some ways at stake to what we're dealing with in the biodiversity crisis. Terms like mass extinction, I think, capture that. And there just isn't room to have hiccups and fumbles along the way.
Yeah.
So the conversation that I had with Helen and Heba about nature markets and getting them right, I feel the impending sense of like, yes, have to get them right. And like what Helen was saying of like, if we came back next year and she was able to point to how did we tweak business as usual to do something less usual, her answer being that business as usual simply isn't an option, period. And I like to see that that's more of a commonly accepted viewpoint in communities like this.
Absolutely. We cannot continue with business as usual.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's been emphasized over and over again in the keynotes and at the end of every session when we ask the speakers, what is your call to action? They say start.
Yeah.
Start now and start fast.
Yeah.
And don't get caught in the weeds of sustainability strategies, and if it's gonna implement the way that we want it to, just start and iterate on it as you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other takeaway, I love our job. We get to curate content.
We do.
We get to talk to smart people who know a lot about things that we want to know more about but don't, hence why we get to talk to them.
Yeah.
And write what we learn and host what we learn at events. And I sometimes don't realize just how hard these people's jobs are.
Right.
So this particular community is one that I have not gotten to know as well in my years of doing this. So this first chance encounter to meet a number, maybe a couple dozen so far, in some depth, and just hear about their day-to-day and the challenges they face internally and systemically and personally. It's quite hard work. So I don't think it's an overstatement to call them heroes in some regard.
I agree. And understanding that their jobs look so different than what I thought they would look like.
Yeah.
When I was speaking to one of the members of Say Dene Nation, I know I keep bringing them up, but they were just so impactful on me. They were talking about how so much of their day-to-day life includes land management. And for me, I was under the assumption that land management meant, going around in a cart and surveying different rivers and surveying mountains and taking water samples and things like that. And while it does include some of that, a big part of what land management looks like to them right now, given how the corporate landscape is playing into their community, is constantly managing and battling people trying to encroach in their land and use the resource in their land for corporate greed. So dealing with the lumber industry, logging, there was a dam that was set up against their will and they were told after the fact, things like that. So those are the aspects of land management that they are now focusing on, when before they were able to prioritize just keeping the well-being of their land, but now they're working on actively fighting out threats. So understanding that the members of this conference have really complex, very intense, very grueling work that they do, and it looks different than what we assume. But like you said, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah. Well, while we're still here, I'm going to reminisce on a previous job I had that I think is relevant to this.
Sure.
Some number of years ago, I worked for the United States Department of Agriculture, supporting the tree nurseries that I don't know how many there are now throughout the United States, but primary nurseries to grow trees for reforestation in national forests. I had a relatively unglamorous job. I drove a refrigerated truck full of trees 2 places.
Wow.
Pretty cool. A lot of good podcasting time and also staring out the window. But I got to attend some of the forest scientist meetings where they were discussing like how to genetically modify trees to grow and match certain elevations that they'll have to grow at as the climate changes. And by the time they'd design and create that next crop, the climate changed faster than they predicted, so you'd have a whole swath or batch of trees that basically are going to die if we plant them. And they didn't have like this whole nature tech ecosystem that we've hosted on stage today. This was 10 plus years ago, was just, I don't even know if that was a thing quite yet, or if it was that community that I was exposed to. I wouldn't say working with, because I was just driving the refrigerator truck, but that I got to listen to. I hope that they're finding opportunities and avenues to connect with the folks like those who joined on stage during Accelerate. And it sounds like they are based on some of what we heard. So I imagine those conversations are better informed and connected to those who are producing solutions like those
prediction models.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a field of constantly predicting the unpredictable and modeling and scaling for something that could change within a second, like a wildfire could completely wipe out a swath of forest. And we talk about this with carbon offsets and nature-based solutions too, where it's like there is that risk. You could invest in a plot of land and that could be flooded, and that could completely ruin the project that you're thinking of doing. So there is risk involved. But would you say that risk is not worth taking action?
I would say it's worth it.
Me too.
Yeah, that's my summary. Great. Well, we will be back in a little bit to bring you some interviews with folks, some of whom I saw this morning in a couple of our tutorial sessions. Definitely had left wanting from those sessions, had some questions I didn't get to ask, so here we are, get to ask them now. So we'll be back.
We will.
Relatively soon.
See you soon.
It's to understand their supply chain and how they can engage all stakeholders that are involved in the project, and especially local communities and ILPLCs.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we talked about all biodiversity. Well, I said all biodiversity is local, but at the same time, talking to other locals, what have you learned? How have you done this? There's a lot of power in those kinds of connections and information sharing and just experience sharing. We got Alex, you got more over here?
Hey everyone, Andres, good to see you all again. One of the emerging leaders here for Bloom. One of the things I'm taking away from this conference is how important it is to bring nature to the conversations with our companies when we are setting our strategies, when we're thinking about how we want to go about running our organizations. Just mentioning nature, I think, is something that is very absent right now that we need to educate people on, and then translate that into how that impacts our communities, right? We mentioned here having that local focus. It's really important, and thinking about both internal, external stakeholders and how that just impacts our overall communities. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, more about connections and local. And one point I want to pick up on, I think it was based on something that Olga said, is that when we're talking about biodiversity, we're talking about science, obviously, but we're talking about nature and the things that we love and do. So it's head and heart. And the key, the challenge is, how do we integrate head and heart? Storytelling is one of the best ways you know how to do that, but it's not always just a story. But finding that sweet spot that inspires people, but actually has accountability or transparency or authenticity, facts, if you will, and finding ways to integrate head and heart as we connect with various partners, as we talk to our various stakeholders, constituencies. That's going to be a really important part of this as this goes forward. So thank you all for this, and let me bring back to the stage Teresa and Alex.